Right, hello, Year 6. It's Mr. Wilson again from Barnsley Academy. So today what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk you through a different monarch. And what we've got today is probably one of the most famous monarchs to ever rule England. And we are going to be looking at Henry VIII. Now, Henry VIII belonged to a family called the Tudors. And this family is known as, or what we call it as like the Kardashians of history, because there's that much drama that goes on with them. And this family became the kings and queens of England after something called the War of the Roses. Now, the War of the Roses was basically a massive war between what's known as the House of Yorkshire and the House of Lancashire, and basically Yorkshire and Lancashire had a fight basically to see who would become king or queen. And in the end, the Tudors won, and they merged the two houses together and became the kings and queens of England. Henry VIII was the second Tudor king, with his dad, Henry VII, being the first. And Henry became king. Henry was born, in 1491, and he died. He lived all the way up until 1547. Now, you might already know this, but Henry VIII is famous for having 6 wives. Uh, you might have heard the famous rhyme, divorce beheaded died, divorce beheaded survived. And that's because Henry VIII was not a particularly nice person. If you start with his first wife, a woman called Catherine of Aragon, he the sort of didn't really get along. She was meant to marry his brother to start with, and his brother was meant to be king instead of Henry. But unfortunately, his brother died, which meant that when Henry became king, he had to marry Catherine of Aragon. Now, what Henry wanted above everything else was a son, a little boy who would become king after Henry died. The problem was, all Catherine could ever give him was a daughter, Mary. Now, this made Henry very mad, and eventually he wanted to divorce Catherine of Aragon. Unfortunately, at the time, Henry was what's known as a Catholic, which is a type of Christian, but it's a type of Christian that doesn't allow divorce. So he couldn't get rid of her, he had to stay married to her. Now, this made Henry very mad. And what he did, and it's probably what his most significant event as king, is he did something called breaking with Rome. He basically split from the Catholic Church. He decided he didn't want to be a Catholic anymore, and he made his own religion, which is sort of one we've got today. It's called the Church of England, which is a Protestant religion. And in doing this, he made himself in charge of the church. He gave himself that power over the religion rather than the Pope having it. And because he was in charge, he allowed himself to divorce Catherine of Aragon. And soon after, he married his second wife, Anne Boleyn. Now, Anne Boleyn as well, he made it clear he wanted a son from her, but she was a lot younger than Catherine of Aragon, so he believed that he would get a son. However, when Anne Boleyn did eventually fall pregnant, she only gave him a daughter as well. This daughter was called Elizabeth. However, there were rumours that started to circulate around what's known as court, where Henry lives and where all the nobles live. And it became known that Anne Boleyn wasn't exactly faithful. She was sort of maybe she was cheating on him. And whether these rumours were true, Henry believed them, and in the end, Anne Boleyn was executed. She got her head chopped off. Now, Henry VIII then goes through several other wives. His next wife is called Jane Seymour, who is a very kind of like a big deal because she does give him his son, the son that he wants, in the form of Edward. Unfortunately, Jane becomes very sick when giving birth to Edward, and a short time after, she ends up dying. So his first 3 wives, his divorced one, beheaded another, and one's unfortunately died. By the time you get to Henry's 5th wife, he'd grown rather fat and old, and even though he'd been like an athletic king in his youth, he'd had a jousting accident which put him off sports, so he basically just sat and ate a lot. Gout, a disease that sort of comes from eating too much meat, was a big problem for Henry. Now, he did sort of carry on to marry. He married a woman called Anne of Cleves next, who He'd never actually met before the wedding. What happened was they delivered a portrait of her painting so Henry could see what she looked like, because no cameras during this time. And when he saw the portrait, it was like, yeah, she's really pretty. I'll marry her. The shallow thing is, when they actually met for the first time, just before the wedding, Henry realised that she looked nothing like a portrait, and he actually thought she was quite ugly, which is really mean. And in doing that, he tried to avoid marrying her. But unfortunately, he didn't get that choice because he'd already sort of arranged it. But he did end up divorcing her, just like he did with Catherine of Aragon. His fifth wife was a woman called Catherine Howard. Now, Catherine Howard was very young and she was Henry's fourth wife's maid. And what happened was, he basically fell in love with her because she was very young and he was very old, and he thought, you know what, she might make me feel alive again. Unfortunately, a bit like with Anne Boleyn, rumours started to circulate around court that she wasn't faithful, that she was cheating on him maybe. So she ended up, like Anne Boleyn, getting her head chopped off. She was beheaded. And at this point, Henry was getting very old, and his final wife, Catherine Parr, sort of married him. She looked after his children. She was nice to him, and Henry did eventually die before she did. So he died in 1547, where she died later in 1548. Now, Henry VIII remembered, because of these six wives and because of that initial break with Rome, that splitting from the Catholic Church to create his own church. And this is something we look at a lot in Year 8 because we think this is really important. It's one of the biggest moments in British history.